"Stop talking, child." Alexander Grant's voice cut through the sleek boardroom, sharp and commanding, but Chloe Bennett, standing barely 5 feet tall, felt a flicker of determination ignite in her chest. The room shimmered with polished glass walls reflecting the bright sunlight that poured in, glinting off the smooth marble floor, and the faint scent of leather and freshly printed contracts filled the air. Chloe clutched her worn notebook, its edges frayed from countless scribbles, and she pressed herself against the corner of the room, invisible yet hyper-aware, her green eyes darting between the towering figures in tailored suits and the glowing projection screen that displayed graphs and numbers no child her age should ever be expected to comprehend. The assistants murmured nervously, glancing at Alexander with a mixture of respect and fear, while he paced like a predator at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the light, hands clasped behind his back, exuding authority with every measured step. Chloe remembered the quiet lessons her mother had imparted: observe, notice, wait, and only act when the truth calls you. Her small hands trembled slightly as she traced the numbers she had copied meticulously in her notebook, noting discrepancies the adults had overlooked, subtle misalignments that could cascade into costly errors. Around her, the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint click of pens and keyboards created a rhythm that pulsed through the room, but her focus was absolute. She inhaled deeply, tasting the faint hint of lemon polish lingering from the conference table surface, and reminded herself that courage was not measured by size, but by clarity of mind. Alexander stopped mid-step, glancing sharply at a projected chart, his eyes narrowing as he barked another command, and the room seemed to shrink around Chloe. The assistants flinched, their eyes on each other, expecting compliance without question. Yet Chloe, heart hammering, felt a calm certainty settle over her. She had seen what no one else had, the subtle flaw that could unravel the entire project if left unchecked. A quiet determination pushed her forward, compelling her to speak despite the unspoken warning, to act despite her diminutive presence, knowing that in mere moments, her observation could alter the course of events in ways even the most powerful in the room could not anticipate. Every polished surface, every gleaming window, every hushed conversation became a backdrop for the small figure of Chloe, poised between invisibility and impact, ready to let her insight break the silence and challenge the authority that had underestimated her for far too long. Chloe took a steadying breath and allowed her eyes to sweep the room once more, absorbing every detail: the polished mahogany table, the gleam of chrome pens, the subtle reflections in the glass walls, and the precise arrangement of papers that none of the executives seemed to notice. Her fingers clutched the edge of her notebook as she compared the numbers she had meticulously copied to the charts projected on the large screen, the difference so small that an adult could have easily overlooked it, yet significant enough to change the entire outcome. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows highlighted the sharp angles of Alexander Grant's tailored suit as he consulted with his advisors, his silver hair catching the light, and Chloe felt the contrast between their imposing presence and her small frame, a reminder of the hierarchy that she was quietly challenging. Around her, the assistants whispered to one another, their voices soft yet urgent, casting fleeting glances at Chloe as if sensing that she held knowledge that could tip the balance. She remembered the lessons her mother had taught her: observe every movement, notice the patterns in behavior, and never underestimate the power of a small voice when it speaks the truth. A shiver of anticipation ran down her spine as she realized that the error she had discovered was about to affect millions of dollars and countless decisions within the company if left uncorrected. Chloe shifted her weight slightly, careful not to draw too much attention, and traced the numbers one final time, confirming her observation. She noted the subtle misalignment in the projected data, the tiny calculation that everyone else had missed while they focused on broader strategies and presentation slides. The hum of the overhead lights and the low murmur of discussion filled the room, but in her mind, a singular clarity emerged, sharpening her focus and fortifying her courage. She felt the weight of the room's expectation, the unspoken challenge from Alexander Grant and the senior executives, and yet an inner calm settled over her, reminding her that her insight was correct and that patience and precision could speak louder than intimidation or authority. Every polished surface, every glint of light, every whisper of movement around her became part of the environment she observed, a living map of opportunity for her to act. Chloe inhaled deeply, the scent of leather and polished wood filling her senses, grounding her, and as she prepared to speak, she felt the convergence of all her observations, knowledge, and quiet determination ready to transform the tension in the room into a pivotal moment where truth and insight could shine. The boardroom seemed to stretch endlessly, glass walls reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling mosaic that made Chloe feel both small and infinitely aware, as if the entire city outside had shrunk to a stage set for her observation. She moved her eyes from the intricate charts projected on the screen to the polished wooden table where executives leaned over stacks of documents, their voices low but urgent, each discussion a note in a complex symphony of decision-making that Chloe was now attuned to in a way no adult had anticipated. The subtle aroma of leather from their chairs mingled with the faint, citrus scent lingering from the polished surfaces, grounding her senses as her mind raced through each calculation she had meticulously verified in her notebook. Every number, every line, every barely noticeable discrepancy called to her, a silent signal that the grand plans being laid out were vulnerable to collapse if unchecked. Chloe's small hands traced the edges of the notebook, and she could feel the texture of each page, worn from countless hours of study, a tangible connection to the knowledge she had gathered in the quiet moments while her mother worked tirelessly nearby. The light shifted as the sun moved higher, casting long, precise shadows that danced along the marble floor, accentuating the height of the executives and the enormity of their authority. Yet Chloe felt a spark of defiance ignite within her, the recognition that insight, however quiet or unseen, carried power in its truth. The whispers of assistants and the subtle scratching of pens became a rhythmic backdrop as Chloe mentally rehearsed the words she might use, the voice she would need to steady, the courage required to speak without hesitation. Alexander Grant's gaze shifted toward a colleague, a subtle furrow of the brow betraying his concern over the growing complexity of the figures, and Chloe's attention sharpened, noting the minute inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed, the tiny margins that could cascade into error. She balanced the fear of speaking out against the certainty that her observation was correct, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also the thrill of potential revelation. The glass walls reflected not only the room but the intensity of the moment, the polished surfaces amplifying every movement, every small gesture magnified in Chloe's perception. Her heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of quiet typing, soft footfalls, and the occasional exhalation from a tense executive, a symphony of expectation she alone could navigate. In that expansive, sunlit space, surrounded by authority and wealth, Chloe felt a singular clarity emerge, the unmistakable sense that the moment for action was approaching, that the careful attention she had devoted to every detail could now manifest in a single, precise intervention that would ripple through the room and alter the course of the meeting in ways that no one had foreseen. Every instinct, every observation, every meticulous note coalesced into readiness, a quiet promise that the next word she spoke would carry weight far beyond her small frame and modest station. And as she took a measured breath, Chloe prepared herself for the precise instant when her insight would meet the attention of the entire room, poised to transform tension into revelation. Chloe shifted slightly on the edge of her small chair, her green eyes scanning the room one final time, absorbing the polished oak table, the gleaming chrome pens, and the subtle reflections of sunlight bouncing off the glass walls that enclosed the boardroom like a crystal cage. Each executive leaned forward, unaware of the minor miscalculation that Chloe had discovered, their expressions fixed on the glowing projection that displayed numbers with the precision expected in a billion-dollar deal, yet blind to the tiny detail that could unravel it. The scent of fresh paper and leather filled the room, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee that had been poured moments earlier, and in this vast, sunlit space, Chloe felt the weight of observation settle on her shoulders, a quiet pressure that was both exhilarating and grounding. She traced the edge of her notebook with her fingers, feeling the worn texture of the pages, each line filled with meticulous calculations she had performed in the quiet hours while her mother worked tirelessly nearby. and she recalled the lessons of patience and attention that had been instilled in her, to notice what others ignored, to question what was taken for granted, to trust the clarity of her own understanding. The assistants shifted in their seats, pens scratching against paper, murmurs exchanged in hushed tones, yet none of them saw Chloe standing at the threshold of insight that would shift the trajectory of the meeting. Alexander Grant paused mid-step, adjusting the cuff of his tailored sleeve, his gaze momentarily flickering toward the chart that Chloe had analyzed, and in that heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, unaware that a small, quiet presence held the key to clarity. Chloe focused on the discrepancies she had identified, the subtle misalignment in figures, the overlooked calculation that everyone else had assumed was correct, and she felt a surge of confidence, the quiet certainty that she had been preparing for in every moment of observation, every careful note, every patient glance at numbers and charts. The polished marble floor beneath her reflected the sunlight in 1,000 fractured rays, and she imagined each one as a signal pointing her toward action, toward the moment when her insight would bridge the gap between error and understanding. She inhaled deeply, the scent of lemon polish from the conference table mingling with her own anticipation, steadying her as she prepared to take the step that would draw attention, the step that would translate observation into influence. Around her, the room continued in its rhythm, the hum of lights, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant murmur of voices, all forming a backdrop for a moment poised on the cusp of revelation. Chloe felt the convergence of all her preparation, the clarity of her mind ready to meet the attention of the executives, the responsibility of her knowledge pressing lightly, urging her forward. In the grand, sun-drenched boardroom, surrounded by authority and wealth, Chloe felt herself aligned with precision, ready to transform the quiet scrutiny of a child into a decisive, insightful intervention that could alter the outcome of the meeting and shift the perception of everyone present, proving that attention, patience, and courage could carry weight beyond size, title, or expectation. Alexander Grant straightened in his chair, scanning the numbers and graphs that stretched across the polished projection screen, unaware that Chloe Bennett's small, precise gaze had identified a subtle misalignment in the calculations that could ripple into a costly oversight. The sunlight poured through the glass walls, glinting off. The metallic pens, the polished wood of the conference table, and the high-gloss tiles beneath Chloe's tiny shoes, highlighting the stark contrast between the vast authority of the executives and the unassuming presence of a child who had become the silent observer of a high-stakes operation. Chloe pressed her small hands to the edges of her notebook, feeling the textured pages beneath her fingertips, each line a careful notation of the anomalies she had discovered during hours of quiet observation while her mother worked tirelessly in the office, her own presence almost invisible to the boardroom's powerful occupants. The scent of leather from the chairs mixed with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee, anchoring Chloe as her mind raced to sequence each detail in a logical order, preparing for the precise moment when she could speak and turn observation into action. Every subtle movement of the executives, every shifting weight, every pause in conversation became part of the pattern she was reading, and Chloe felt the quiet surge of anticipation as her insight aligned with the opportunity to intervene at exactly the right time. The assistant to the CEO moved quietly across the room, the soft click of heels on marble echoing faintly, and Chloe noted the timing, the intervals between spoken words, the micro-expressions that betrayed a growing tension and uncertainty. Her small frame barely noticeable in the corner, she felt both the pressure of the moment and the exhilaration that came with knowing she held a piece of information no one else had seen. The humming of the air conditioning, the muted scratching of pens, and the occasional low murmur from the senior advisors became a background rhythm that Chloe synchronized with, calculating the exact instant when a precise comment could redirect attention and prevent a significant misstep. Alexander shifted his gaze, momentarily catching a glimmer of movement in the corner, but the vastness of the room and his focus on the projections prevented him from identifying the source of the insight quietly brewing. Chloe's heart raced, and she could feel the quiet determination building within her, a combination of preparation, observation, and courage, ready to crystallize into action. Every polished surface, every reflective pane, Every whisper of movement coalesced into the perfect stage for her intervention, and as she took a slow, deliberate breath, Chloe prepared to step from the margin of invisibility into a moment where her knowledge, precision, and bravery would intersect with opportunity, setting the scene for the revelation that could change the entire trajectory of the meeting and impress upon every executive in the room the power of attentive observation and timely action. Chloe felt the weight of every gaze in the room, even though none were directly on her, and the tension that had been coiling around the polished mahogany table seemed to thrum in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The faint click of pens against notepads and the soft shuffle of papers became a metronome guiding her focus, each movement of the executives magnified in her awareness, from the subtle tap of Alexander Grant's leather-soled shoes on the marble floor to the tilt of a hand adjusting a tie in nervous concentration. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, fractured shadows across the room, illuminating the sheen of polished chrome and highlighting the careful symmetry of the charts and graphs that dominated the wall. Chloe's eyes traced each figure, each line of data, noting the minute discrepancy she had discovered, the small misalignment that everyone else had glossed over in their rush to interpret the projections. The scent of leather, polished wood, and freshly brewed coffee enveloped the space, grounding her in the midst of a room filled with authority and expectation, while the hum of the air conditioning created a steady backdrop against which every detail became more vivid. Chloe's fingers tightened around the edges of her notebook, worn from hours of meticulous notation, and she allowed herself a single breath to steady the resolve that had been building within her since she had first recognized the error. The assistants shifted in their seats, murmuring softly, unaware that the solution they needed was quietly preparing to emerge from the corner of the room, a small figure of concentration and quiet confidence. Alexander adjusted his posture, scanning the projections with a furrowed brow, his eyes narrowing as he debated options with his advisors, unaware that Chloe had already identified the precise point where correction was required. Every subtle cue, every glance, every half-spoken phrase became part of the pattern Chloe had been mapping, each moment reinforcing the clarity of her understanding and the inevitability of her intervention. The polished floors reflected the sunlight in sharp, fractured angles, emphasizing the contrast between the expansive, formal room and the small but focused presence of Chloe, whose attention to detail had prepared her for this critical juncture. Her heart pounded with anticipation, but beneath it, a calm determination held her steady, the knowledge that the insight she carried could shift the trajectory of the meeting if she acted with precision. In the golden light, with the air tinged by coffee and lemon polish, Chloe poised herself mentally, rehearsing the words she would speak and the exact manner to present the discrepancy, knowing that the room would hold its collective breath the moment she chose to bridge silence with revelation. Every reflective surface, every faint movement, every whispered conversation became part of the stage for Chloe's imminent contribution, and as she steadied herself, she felt the quiet assurance that the culmination of her observations, patience, and courage would soon intersect with the awareness of everyone in the room, transforming tension into clarity and proving that even the smallest presence could wield profound influence in the right moment. Chloe could feel the quiet pressure building inside her chest, a mixture of anticipation and resolve, as the executives continued their discussion unaware of the subtle flaw she had discovered. Sunlight glinted off the glass walls, creating patterns across the polished marble floor that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the tension in the room. The air was filled with the faint scent of leather from the chairs, polished wood from the conference table, and the lingering aroma of coffee, grounding Chloe as she focused on the minute details that no one else had noticed. Every number, every line, every barely perceptible discrepancy seemed to call out to her, demanding attention, and she traced them carefully in her notebook, her fingers brushing the worn pages that bore evidence of countless hours of observation and preparation. Alexander Grant's sharp eyes flickered briefly toward a colleague, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern, and Chloe sensed the subtle shift in the room, a moment of opportunity forming in the wake of distracted focus. The assistants exchanged quiet glances, pens moving across notepads, unaware that the insight needed to prevent a critical error was quietly incubating in the corner, in the form of a small, determined girl who had spent weeks learning to see what others overlooked. Chloe's gaze moved across the projection screen again, noting the alignment of the figures, the tiny error that could cascade into consequences far beyond the room itself, and she felt the familiar surge of quiet confidence that came from understanding the magnitude of her observation. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint shuffle of papers became a backdrop, a rhythm against which Chloe measured her timing, preparing to speak at exactly the right moment. Every polished surface, every reflective window, every shadow cast across the room heightened her awareness, focusing her attention on the subtle, critical details that only she had seen. The sunlight shifted, highlighting the edges of her notebook, the small pencil marks that traced the discrepancy, and Chloe felt the convergence of all her preparation and courage, ready to transform observation into action. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wood polish and coffee, and let her mind settle, rehearsing the words she would use and the precise moment she would speak, knowing that the room would collectively pause, suspended on the cusp of revelation. The tension in the boardroom, the unspoken hierarchy, and the polished authority of Alexander Grant and the senior executives all became the stage upon which Chloe's insight would emerge, a quiet but potent force capable of redirecting attention, correcting the mistake, and proving that careful observation, patience, and courage could command attention and respect even in the most imposing of spaces. In this sunlit, expansive room, Chloe balanced the gravity of the moment with the certainty of her knowledge, ready to step from the periphery into a point of influence where her small voice could carry enormous impact, altering the course of the meeting in ways that would surprise everyone. Chloe shifted her weight slightly, feeling the polished marble beneath her small shoes, the sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows glinting off the glass walls and casting long streaks of light across the boardroom, highlighting the meticulous arrangement of documents and charts that stretched across the polished oak table. Every detail in the room, the subtle scent of leather, the faint aroma of coffee, the low hum of the air conditioning, grounded her as she prepared to bridge the gap between quiet observation and decisive action. Her fingers traced the worn edges of her notebook, each line of careful notation a testament to hours of patient scrutiny, and she felt the quiet thrill of anticipation as she reviewed the minor discrepancy she had discovered, the subtle misalignment in the numbers that everyone else had overlooked. Alexander Grant's sharp gaze flicked between his advisors, his brow furrowed as he debated the projections, unaware that the correction he needed was poised to emerge from a corner where authority and size had dismissed a small figure as irrelevant. The assistants exchanged soft murmurs, pens moving across notepads, oblivious to the potential shift in the meeting that was quietly taking shape. Chloe drew in a deep breath, the air infused with the scent of polished wood and lemon polish, steadying herself as she considered the precise words and tone she would use, the exact moment when her voice could command the room's attention without hesitation. Every flicker of movement, every shifting expression, every subtle sound of paper sliding across the table became part of her awareness, forming a symphony of context that she alone could interpret with clarity. The sunlight angled sharply, reflecting off the metallic pens and charts, and Chloe felt a surge of confidence, the realization that her observation could not only prevent a costly mistake, but also redefine how those around her perceived insight, courage, and attention to detail. The room seemed to hold its breath, a tension that Chloe could almost feel vibrating through the polished surfaces, and she imagined the moment of revelation crystallizing, when her careful preparation would intersect with the blind spot of the executives, drawing all eyes to the accuracy and significance of her intervention. In the quiet stillness, Chloe sensed the inevitability of her action, the culmination of patience, precision, and courage ready to emerge, and she felt the subtle shift within herself, the transition from observer to actor, as she aligned her focus, her voice, and her understanding to transform the silent tension into a moment of clarity that would ripple through the boardroom, proving that insight, regardless of size or age, could command attention and respect when applied with certainty and composure. Chloe took a decisive step forward, her small voice breaking the rhythm of the hushed room as she carefully spoke. "Sir, there is an error in the projections here." Her words clear, precise, and carrying the weight of certainty. The boardroom fell silent instantly. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint rustle of papers, and the subtle shifting of chairs fading into the sudden attention directed toward the corner where a 10-year-old girl had dared to speak. Alexander Grant froze mid-gesture, his silver hair catching the sunlight streaming through the glass walls, eyes widening as he followed Chloe's gaze to the specific figures on the glowing projection, the subtle misalignment that had been overlooked by the most experienced advisors in the room. The polished marble reflected the sunlight in fractured lines across the floor, highlighting the contrast between the immensity of the executive's authority and the quiet determination emanating from the small figure of Chloe, whose careful observation had prepared her for this exact moment. The assistants paused, pens hovering above notepads, murmurs dying in their throats as they registered the significance of the correction, and a ripple of surprise moved through the room, like sunlight refracting through crystal. Chloe's green eyes remained focused, her hands resting lightly on the edge of her worn notebook, the pages filled with meticulous notations that now validated her courage and insight. Alexander leaned over the table, his gaze narrowing as he scanned the projection, tracing the discrepancy that Chloe had identified, and slowly, realization spread across his face, a mixture of astonishment and reluctant admiration. The executives, previously absorbed in their own analyses, now followed the unfolding moment, understanding that the tiny, unassuming presence in the corner had uncovered a detail critical to the success of the project, a detail that would have caused substantial error if left uncorrected. The sunlight continued to stream across the room, illuminating the polished chrome, the leather chairs, and the intricate details of the projections, as Chloe's voice guided the attention of the room to the precise point of correction, each word measured, deliberate, and unerring. The room, once a theater of authority and control, shifted subtly, the hierarchy momentarily rebalanced by the clarity and courage of a child whose attention to detail had surpassed the assumptions of experience and title. Alexander Grant straightened slowly, taking in the implications of Chloe's observation, and a faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between him and a few of his advisors, acknowledging the gravity of the intervention. Every reflective surface, every polished corner of the room, and every subtle movement of sunlight now seemed to spotlight Chloe's contribution, emphasizing that insight and courage, regardless of age or stature, could command recognition and respect. In that suspended moment, the balance of authority and knowledge tipped slightly in favor of clarity, as Chloe, small and unassuming yet unshakably precise, had transformed quiet observation into decisive action, leaving the boardroom poised on the cusp of understanding the true weight of her insight, the room collectively holding its breath for the consequences that were about to unfold. The room held its breath as Alexander Grant leaned back slightly, absorbing the full impact of Chloe Bennett's intervention, the sunlight casting a warm glow across the polished marble and glass surfaces, highlighting the astonishment on every executive's face. The projections now displayed the corrected figures, the subtle misalignment adjusted, and a ripple of comprehension moved through the boardroom as advisors realized the gravity of the oversight that had been quietly discovered. Chloe's small presence in the corner radiated an unexpected authority, her green eyes steady, her hands resting lightly on the worn notebook that contained the evidence of her meticulous preparation. Alexander's gaze softened, a mixture of admiration and reluctant acknowledgment passing across his features as he nodded imperceptibly toward Chloe, recognizing that insight could come from the most unexpected sources. The polished wooden table reflected the light in 100 fractured rays, accentuating the contrast between the vastness of the room and the precision of Chloe's action, every detail of her observation now validated in a moment of shared realization. The assistants, previously tense and silent, began to exchange glances, whispers of acknowledgment passing quietly between them. As the room shifted subtly, a new awareness settling in that even the smallest, quietest figure could hold influence over outcomes of considerable magnitude. Sunlight streaked through the glass walls, illuminating the subtle chrome accents and the finely polished leather chairs, framing Chloe in a halo of significance, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of preparation meeting opportunity. Every page she had written, every calculation carefully checked, every patient hour of observation had culminated in this instant, a convergence of diligence, courage, and timing that had drawn the attention of the most powerful figures in the room. Alexander adjusted his posture, the rigid lines of authority softening as he looked directly at Chloe, the room collectively absorbing the truth that clarity and precision could transcend age, status, and expectation. The air, still scented faintly with leather and coffee, seemed to thrum with the residual tension of a revelation, as the executives processed the implications of Chloe's observation, the realization that a moment of insight could prevent disaster and alter the trajectory of critical decisions. The polished floors mirrored the sunlight, and the attentive expressions, a tableau of a room transformed by one small, courageous voice. Chloe remained calm, poised, her presence steady and commanding despite her size, knowing that the recognition she had earned was not only for the correction itself, but for the demonstration that careful attention, patience, and courage could wield profound influence. In that suspended, sunlit space, the boardroom had been forever changed by a quiet, precise action, and the executives, Alexander at the forefront, now held a new appreciation for the power of observation, the depth of preparation, and the unanticipated authority of a child whose insight had proven decisive in a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of the room. The tension in the boardroom slowly gave way to a palpable sense of relief and admiration as the executives absorbed the full implications of Chloe Bennett's intervention, their eyes lingering on the small girl who had quietly corrected a critical error that could have cost the company millions of dollars. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, casting long, golden streaks across the polished marble floor, illuminating the subtle chrome accents and highlighting the expressions of astonishment and newfound respect on the faces of Alexander Grant and his senior advisors. Chloe's green eyes remained steady, her hands resting lightly on the edges of her notebook, which now seemed to carry the weight of authority, each page a testament to her careful preparation, observation, and courage. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, mingling with the aroma of coffee, creating a grounding atmosphere in which the executives could fully comprehend the significance of what had just occurred. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgment, a silent gesture recognizing that insight, patience, and precision could emerge from even the youngest and quietest member of the room. The assistants, previously tense and apprehensive, relaxed slightly, exchanging glances that communicated astonishment and respect for the unexpected authority of a child whose focus and clarity had surpassed their own assumptions. Chloe felt a quiet sense of accomplishment settle over her as she realized that her careful attention to detail had not only prevented a costly error, but had also demonstrated the power of observation, courage, and initiative, and she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the subtle shift in the room. The way the hierarchy had momentarily adjusted in recognition of her contribution. The polished oak table reflected the sunlight and the expressions of the executives, emphasizing the contrast between the formal, structured environment and the decisive impact of a single, determined individual acting with clarity and confidence. Every reflective surface, every glint of light on the chrome pens and leather chairs, and every gentle hum of the air conditioning seemed to underscore the significance of Chloe's action, highlighting the lesson that preparation, insight, and bravery could command attention and respect regardless of age or stature. Alexander's advisors leaned in, reviewing the corrected figures with renewed focus, their expressions softening as they acknowledged that a small, observant presence had steered the discussion back on course. The sunlight continued to bathe the room in a warm glow, the polished surfaces and glass walls amplifying the sense of a pivotal moment that had just unfolded, a quiet yet profound demonstration of competence and courage that would resonate far beyond the immediate meeting. Chloe, standing with calm confidence, felt the subtle admiration and respect emanating from the room, knowing that her preparation, patience, and clarity had changed not only the trajectory of the project, but also the perception of everyone present, leaving an indelible impression that insight and courage, no matter the source, could influence even the most powerful and meticulous environments. In that suspended moment, the boardroom had been transformed, and Chloe Bennett's quiet, precise action became a testament to the power of observation, intellect, and courage, proving that even the smallest voice could leave a lasting impact on a world built on authority, precision, and expectation. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted completely, the polished marble floors and gleaming glass walls now reflecting not just sunlight, but a subtle warmth that seemed to acknowledge Chloe Bennett's impact on the room. Alexander Grant leaned back slightly in his chair, a faint smile crossing his face as he allowed himself a moment to appreciate the precision and courage of the young girl whose careful observation had prevented a critical mistake. The executives and assistants around the table, who had moments before been tense with anticipation, now exhaled collectively, their expressions softening as the realization sank in that clarity, diligence, and courage could emerge from the most unexpected sources. Chloe remained poised in her corner, her green eyes bright and steady, the worn notebook under her hands now a silent testament to the hours of preparation and patient scrutiny that had brought her to this pivotal moment. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and coffee, a grounding presence that framed the boardroom in a new light, one in which insight and determination had triumphed over assumption and authority. Alexander's gaze lingered on Chloe, the nod of acknowledgment deepening, a quiet recognition that age and stature were not the only measures of influence or wisdom. Sunlight danced across the chrome pens and leather chairs, highlighting the subtle shifts in posture and expression among the executives, each one registering a lesson that could not be ignored. That careful attention, thoughtful observation, and the courage to speak truth could reshape outcomes and redefine expectations in ways that authority alone never could. The assistants, previously hesitant and watchful, now moved with a renewed sense of respect, their whispered exchanges acknowledging the quiet yet decisive impact of Chloe's insight. The boardroom, once dominated by tension and hierarchy, now held a gentle but undeniable sense of equilibrium, as if the very space had absorbed the lesson that courage and intellect could manifest in any form, regardless of size, age, or position. Chloe's presence, though small and unassuming, had become the focal point, a living embodiment of precision, patience, and bravery, and as she allowed herself a subtle exhale, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her contribution had shifted not only the immediate outcome, but also the perception of everyone present. The sunlight continued to stream through the glass walls, illuminating polished surfaces and casting long, reflective patterns across the room, reinforcing the subtle transformation that had occurred. A room of immense power and wealth humbled and inspired by the clarity and courage of a young observer. In this suspended, sunlit moment, the boardroom had learned an enduring lesson about the importance of vigilance, attention, and the quiet strength that can emerge from even the most unexpected corners, leaving Chloe Bennett's presence indelibly etched in the memory of all who had witnessed her decisive action and the profound influence that insight, patience, and courage can wield. As the sunlight continued to stream through the expansive glass walls, Chloe Bennett felt a quiet sense of accomplishment settle over her, the boardroom now alive with a subtle warmth and newfound respect that had replaced the tension and anticipation that had defined the morning. Alexander Grant, seated at the head of the polished oak table, allowed himself a brief smile of recognition, his posture relaxing as he acknowledged the clarity, courage, and precision that Chloe had demonstrated, understanding fully that insight and diligence could emerge from even the youngest and least expected individuals. The executives and assistants, their expressions a mixture of admiration and thoughtful reflection, began to move with a renewed sense of purpose, reviewing the corrected figures and revised projections with a careful attention that mirrored Chloe's own meticulous approach, while the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint aroma of coffee and polished wood created a serene atmosphere in which respect and understanding could flourish. Chloe's green eyes scanned the room one final time, taking in the subtle shifts in posture, the gentle nods of acknowledgment, and the way the polished surfaces reflected not only light, but the collective recognition that courage and observation, no matter how quiet or unassuming, could profoundly influence outcomes. The sunlight glinted off the chrome pins, the smooth leather chairs, and the projections on the screen, illuminating Chloe's presence and emphasizing the contrast between the authority of the executives and the remarkable impact of her small, determined figure. A sense of balance and calm now permeated the space, the hierarchy of power momentarily softened by the demonstration that insight, preparation, and patience could transcend age and status, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Chloe's notebook, worn and filled with carefully recorded observations, remained in her hands, a tangible representation of the diligence, foresight, and quiet courage that had guided her through the high-stakes environment of the boardroom, and she felt a serene satisfaction in knowing that her careful attention to detail had not only corrected a critical error but also reshaped the perceptions of those around her, inspiring respect, humility, and acknowledgment of the value of vigilance and intelligence in every form. The executives leaned forward, discussing the implications of the corrections with renewed focus, their voices soft yet deliberate, and Chloe could sense the subtle shift in the culture of the room, a newfound openness to unexpected contributions and the understanding that even the smallest voice, when guided by insight and courage, could alter the course of events in meaningful ways. The polished floors and reflective glass walls amplified the sense of a moment suspended in time, a tableau of learning, acknowledgment, and quiet triumph, while Chloe, standing poised and composed, experienced the satisfaction of having transformed observation and preparation into decisive, influential action. The warmth of sunlight on the surfaces, the gentle scent of coffee and polished wood, and the soft murmurs of recognition from the executives combined to create a serene and inspiring environment, reinforcing the enduring lesson that preparation, insight, patience, and courage, regardless of age or stature, hold the power to shape outcomes and command respect, leaving Chloe Bennett's presence indelibly marked on the minds of all who had witnessed her quiet yet profound achievement.